Now, Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 9 is also a seriously significant chapter for understanding this Jubilee concept. Again, and I'm on page 36 of Margaret Barker's Great High Priest. Now again, this is yet another passage of Scripture besides Leviticus 25 that the 11Q Melchizedek emphasizes. So it pays to understand what this is about. This is a significant Jubilee passage, he says. Someone anointed with the Spirit is to bring good tidings to the poor, to comfort the brokenhearted, and proclaim liberty. There it is again, Doror. Proclaim liberty to captives. This is the year of the Lord's favor, in other words. The Jubilee, and also the day of judgment. This is the day of the Lord. The Song of Moses shows that when the Lord appeared to avenge the blood of his servants, he atoned the land of his people. Deuteronomy 32:43. That the day of the Lord was also the day of atonement when the heavenly high priest emerged from the sanctuary. This is also confirmed by later texts, such as the Assumption of Moses in chapter 10. You see how all of this non-canonical materials help connect these Qumran community back to our understanding of the Old Testament in the later era, just before Christ's day. This is the biblical context, in other words. The Bible itself is vital to understand, even though it has been rewritten. Now that we have all of the other materials that were excluded from the canon based on a political situation, now we have a better grasp of the attitude, the feelings, the perceptions, the religion of Israel just before Jesus arrives on the scene. It's very interesting here. That the day of the Lord was also the day of atonement when the heavenly high priest emerged from the sanctuary. Oh, I already read that. The anointed one in Isaiah 61. Now we're talking about this specific person in Isaiah 61. He was to restore some ousted people to their former inheritance. They then would be recognized as the Lord's people and given their rightful portion of the land. Isaiah 61 verse 7. Here the concept of Jubilee gives hope to the dispossessed who had been deprived of their rights and their inheritance when the exiled returned from Babylon to establish the Second Temple. The Jubilee was used to measure time in the Second Temple period. The Second Temple is the temple that the Jews built after they came back from Babylon, 600 BC. Solomon's temple was the first temple, and it was destroyed. Then the Second Temple that was rebuilt from, say, 400 BC up to Jesus' day. That's called the Second Temple period. The period when, if we accept how our Bible is put together canonically, the way the Christian Bible ends with Malachi, the Jewish canon is differently structured than that. There's a different emphasis in the Jewish canon. See, again, even the very order of the books in the canon is a political situation. So the claim is, for those 400 years from Malachi to Matthew, was the silent era? Don't you believe it? This is the era of the books of Enoch and Jubilees, the pseudepigrapha, the testamentary literatures. There was an enormous amount of material still being written and of mankind seeking their God through revelation and having their ascensions to heaven and seeing their higher double self as Enoch does, and this time of Melchizedek, so on and so forth. This was not just all of a sudden a lights out dark time, and then all of a sudden Jesus shows up as the true light. Jesus does show up as the true light. This is true. But the period between the Testaments is not a dead period. It's some of the most exciting materials we have right now is from that period. And it directly connects to the background, the fundamental understanding, so that we can read the Gospels with an understanding. It's very necessary to understand this period. And the 11Q Melchizedek, bingo, right there. The dating has been argued anywhere from 50 AD all the way back to 100 BC. So there's a 150 year gap there. That's what Kobelski notes in his study that I showed you the other day with all those fragments on the Melchizedek. So, It was used as a measure of time. And there is an important coincidence of important events and Jubilee years in Israel. There was a Jubilee during the 18th year of King Josiah's reign, probably the reason for the temple refurbishment, that's 2 Kings 22:8. This implies that the temple repairs uncovered the law book that led to his purge, whereas when we read in 2 Chronicles 34, this implies that the temple repairs were the final acts of his religious purge. So reckoning a 50-year Jubilee in the first temple period, that gives us 622 BC as the date of the temple restoration, because there was another Jubilee in the 14th year after Jerusalem was conquered. This is 572 BC. This is the 25th year of Ezekiel's exile that we learn from Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1. So his vision of the restoration, this is interesting because his vision of the restoration, it was a Jubilee vision. You see how that connects. It's very interesting here. And the Lord in this vision returns to his place in the temple. This is Ezekiel 43, 1 through 5. The land being allocated once more among the 12 tribes, the dispossessed of their inheritance. They had been taken away by the Assyrians under Sennacherib, 722 BC. So this is Ezekiel chapter 48, verses 1 through 29. So if we reckon back another 50-year Jubilee to 722 BC, this was also a Jubilee year. Isn't that fascinating? The time the Assyrians came and took Israel captive was a Jubilee year. Wow, that's fascinating. And this is the date of Isaiah's Jubilee sign, Isaiah 37, 30 through 32. It's very interesting. So when we reckon from Ezekiel's Jubilee vision in 572 BC, this gives another Jubilee year in 522 BC. This is a possible date for Zerubbabel and Joshua's coming to Jerusalem and attempting to reestablish the worship there. There was also 49-year Jubilees in 473 BC, 424 BC. One possible date for Ezra's return to Jerusalem is 428 BC. So you can see how the Jubilee years correlate with really interesting events in Israel's history, can't you? That's all she's trying to establish. It could well have been a Jubilee year in 424 that prompted both this return and the covenant renewal. So that was interesting too. And anyway, what I want to do is get to this 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel. And it's very interesting how she puts this together with the Dead Sea Scroll fragment of the 11Q Melchizedek. Wow, look at all these gorgeous flowers. The birds are out singing and the flowers are out. And I'm sharing the Dead Sea Scrolls with you. It doesn't get better than that, does it? I don't know if it does or not. Continuing on Margaret Barker's analysis of the 70 years, the 70 weeks of years. I'm on page 37 of The Great High Priest. The 70 weeks of years, the 490 years. Now remember, the Jubilee year was either 49 or 50. If we have 490 years, then that equals 10 Jubilees, right? Because 10 times 49 years of Jubilees is 490 years. This is 70 weeks of years. You see how that works? So there's 10 Jubilees. Now, Jewish tradition remembered that the 490 years ended in 68 of the Common Era. This was the time of the destruction of the Jews and their temple, yet again, by Titus. This is the era. It takes it right up to the destruction of the temple. Isn't that interesting?